John, I think when it comes to mythological, I guess, monsters, I think when I was a kid, I mean, we have always watched horror movies, like my family.
You don't say, man. I mean, we just talked
So
about Beetlejuice.
as a kid, like, the conversation a lot of times was like, would you rather be like a vampire or a werewolf? And I think I would rather be a werewolf, to be honest.
I mean, look at your face, Matt. I mean, your face
I mean, I
literally
know I
says a
have a
beard.
beard, but that does not necessarily mean anything.
I understand, but I mean, if you're looking at this creature, okay, like it's hairy all over the place, all right? So, I mean, you're already fitting the description right now so far. So, I mean, as long as you don't have, I don't know what that's called, is a lichenism where the whole body just like, especially on the face and like in other areas that don't normally grow hair, like you'll have it over your face, your basically your whole entire body, and it almost makes you look like you're like a werewolf, but you're not quite.
I
You
don't know
know,
what it's called, but I don't think it's lichenism.
I thought it was, but basically, like your body like turns into like a werewolf kind of figure. But it's like the I always think of like the bearded lady or the I would say like unfortunately like regular males or even females that like basically turn into like almost like a werewolf like creature, but they're not. They don't possess the supernatural
Yeah, yeah,
abilities that like werewolves do. But what I find interesting, man,
yeah.
is the history behind it. So, like, when you look at the literal definition of like what a werewolf is, so in Old English, it would mean man wolf, which that would make sense, right? But in Greek, I understand lycanthrope, right? Or lichens. The Greek meaning of it is wolf human. Now, I understand it means the same thing, but I think man wolf sounds cooler. Like if I'm just going off of like the literal meanings and the derivatives of it, but
Well, I mean, no one's walking around going, "Wow, that's a cool wolfie man."
Wolfie man, hey Wolfie man, or like man wolf, hey, what's your name? My name's a man wolf. Like, I don't know. I just think werewolves are. I agree. I
That
think
sounds like a He-Man character.
like man wolf. That it probably does. It probably is it probably is on He-Man.
It
Am I
probably
wrong?
is. Yeah, you're probably right.
But I agree with you that if I was to choose between a werewolf and a vampire, now I always think of the Twilight series. Don't ask me why, but
Wow.
look, I'm going there because when I look at, that stupid, like I would say girl
Sparkly.
fantasy. Well, that was the thing. It's like, they're like gleaming as vampires and they're like very dazzled and everything else. And like these werewolves are rugged, they're ready to go and they're like this and that. But like, I agree.
I think more of like Underworld,
I'm
John,
kidding.
not
That's a
like
joke.
not like Twilight.
Matt,
Come
I was
on.
I was joking, but the point I'm trying to make is like when I look at like mythological creatures, I even look at Van Helsing. Like when I look at that, right? So I look at the werewolf and how how technically, like let's say a guy your size, right? And then all of a sudden you're like 8-9 feet tall because of the varying of the depiction of like the werewolves,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like if I could be that tall, I mean I'm already a tall guy, but if I'm at my height and then like let's add like another 3-4 feet, I'm like, dude, I would love to see a werewolf basketball team, man. I would love to see, how they would do, or maybe football players, maybe be linemen or something like that. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it'd
I
be
don't know.
interesting.
But werewolves made an appearance in early Greek mythology,
Okay.
which is where we get the Greek meaning, wolf human for lycanthrope. And I'm gonna try to pronounce his name, John, because when there's an A before the O, it's really weird to me. Um, Lycaon, I guess would be how you pronounce the name.
Sure, we'll go with that.
I'm just gonna call him Lie. Can I just call him Lie?
If that's gonna help you, then
It
go
will
for
help me because I his name is in here like 3 times. So the legend of Lie, um, he is the son of these names. I swear to God, right now,
this is great. Keep
Um,
going, Matt.
Palag.
Pelagus.
Yes, that one.
Yes.
So he angered the god Zeus when he served him a meal made from the remains of a sacrificed boy. And
Mm.
as punishment, the enraged Zeus turned Lie and his sons into wolves.
With Greek mythology, I will say it's one of my favorite like stories, like or like just literal how they describe the heroes and like different mythological
Yeah.
creatures because it's interesting how, of course, Zeus is always involved. All right, Zeus is always the guy that you piss him off. Guess what? There's a reason why that's the one god you don't want to piss off, and like clearly in this case, yeah, go ahead and feed him something, and then
Yeah,
he's gonna turn you into something.
you make a meal of some sacrificed boy, and then he's like gets so enraged that he turns you and your sons into wolves. I mean,
It's kind of in my opinion, it's kind of weird how it was very specific on that's what he was going to turn him into. You know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
He could
yeah.
have turned him into so many things, but it's interesting how they described it in that particular story. But like,
I mean, at least he didn't like liquefy him or say, which he obviously could have just done. Like,
so yeah, no, I agree. And
yeah,
you know what? Just for your sake, since you don't like to pronounce names, right?
yeah, I got Volsungs. I mean, that one's
Oh,
easy.
well, no, it's okay. I got you. So the saga of Volsungs tells the story of a father and son who discovered a wolf pelts that had the power to turn people into wolves for 10 days.
That's oddly specific.
That is very oddly specific. So the father-son duo donned their pelts, transformed into wolves, and then went on a killing rampage in the forest. Their rampage ended when the father attacked his son, causing a lethal wound. The son only survived because of a kind raven gave the father a leaf with healing power. So my guess is Odin, of course, with his raven eyes and everything else, like he stepped in to kind of, help with that situation. But it's weird how that's how they turned into werewolves. Like they just say, oh, here's a pelt, and here you go, and they just turned into wolves,
I
basically.
mean, it's a common theme within like the Nordic and even the Greek, you know, folklore and the mythology behind it. You know, sometimes it's a pelt. Other times it's not like the whole animal pelt. Sometimes it's just a belt.
See, that's weird that you would just get a belt, and specifically.
Yeah, I mean there's a lot of different, mythologies and folklore behind, you know, the actual thing, the item or the cursed item that transforms them into, the actual wolf. But what I do find interesting with the history is like, especially in Europe, because I think this was more Europe than in America. Because I don't think America was really werewolf crazy as much as Europe was, but
I think it
um,
depends on what part of Europe, though, because it's not necessarily like
I probably would want to say like more probably like France, like French. I would probably would say because a lot of these people were French, and so 1521, Frenchman Pierre Bergot and Michael Verdun allegedly swore allegiance to the devil and claim they have an ointment that turned them into wolves because that is totally sane.
that just sounds very
Yeah,
demonic. I don't know. It's just
you know.
yeah, that's a little weird how they swore themselves to the devil, and then they said, hey, you know what? We have an ointment that turns ourselves into wolves. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, and then after confessing to brutally murdering several children, they were both burned to death at the stake, which burning was one of the ways that was thought to kill a werewolf.
So I thought another way was it silver?
Silver. And we'll get there.
Oh, sorry,
But
I'm
there's
jumping
a,
ahead.
there's a couple other stories. Giles Garnier, who is known as the Werewolf of Dole, um, was another 16th century Frenchman whose claim was he also had an ointment with wolf morphing abilities. And according to the legend, as a wolf, he viciously killed children and ate them. He too was burned to death at the stake for his crimes. So
It's
I think it's interesting, like, you do these crimes and then you get caught and you're like, oh, I have this ointment. Like,
I just think
I
it's
have
weird.
this ointment that turns me into a wolf. I don't know what I'm doing.
I just think it's weird that it's specifically an ointment. It's not like, it's not an herb. It's not like I don't know, like this lady that gives you powers or like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it's not like that. No, it's an ointment. Like and first of all, do they really like to me like I don't even think ointments were really a thing, but I guess they're just using it as
No, and
this
it's
term.
it's really the question of like, were they mentally ill? Were they acting, under the influence of some kind of a substance, or
Peyote.
were they really just serial killers?
Uh,
It's
yeah.
really like it's really kind of one of those things that's like, in the 16th century, Europeans were that superstitious.
What if Jack the Ripper was a werewolf? I don't know. See, I mean,
I doubt it.
yeah, well, you
Um,
never know.
but for Europeans during that time, only such crimes like that these two, that these people so far were committing could only be done by somebody who was a werewolf.
So then, like, if you look at movies and stuff, like, you have to be bitten by a werewolf if we're depicting it, right? Because if you were a werewolf and then let's say the transfer powers, I guess if you want to
I
call
don't
it.
know if that's what they believed back then, though.
Well, no, but that's what you know what I mean? Because like if you look back at the other stories, I mean, like you look at the pelts and you look at the belts, and of course they have to rhyme, but like, and then in this case, it's ointments. It's like, I'm just curious on how. I know we'll probably get more into it later, but like the modern take of how the wolf bite, came into play instead of like using certain, you know, let's say objects or like, different
We'll
things to like
definitely
change it.
get there because Europeans had some really crazy ideas. And so we will definitely touch on that a little bit.
I will say humans have really crazy ideas, but we just go along with it. But
Yeah, there are some really really crazy ideas. But there is one other person, um, Peter Stubb. He was a wealthy 15th century farmer in Germany. He's probably one of the most notorious, and I use air quotes, werewolves. Um, According to folklore, he turned into a wolf-like creature at night and devoured many citizens of Bedburg, which is in Germany. Peter was eventually blamed for the gruesome killings after being cornered by hunters who claimed they saw him shapeshift from a wolf to a human form. He experienced a grisly execution after confessing under torture to savagely killing animals, men, women, and children, and eating their remains. He also declared that he owned an enchanted belt that gave him the power to transform into a wolf at will. So, not surprisingly, the belt that he supposedly owned was never actually found.
I, to me, like I said, with having an object like a belt or like the pelt of like a wolf or something like that, it's weird how they never actually found it, but they claim that these objects can make them, basically shapeshift or transform into basically a wolf. And then, of course, in a wolf's mind, it's like this ravenous, like, I got to go on a killing spree. I got to go do these things. And it's
Yeah, I
like,
mean, it's all it. I mean, obviously, for the people that are doing these crimes, it's obviously like, mentally ill. You know, he's obviously a serial killer who's doing this for whatever purpose, like whether it's a serial killer or mentally ill or both. The one thing about him is his guilt is a little bit controversial, since there are people that believe that he wasn't a killer, but it was more of a political witch hunt, or werewolf hunt, I guess you could call it, um, because he confessed under torture. Like I said, they were torturing him, and he confessed. And for most people, like if you're getting tortured,
you're going to believe anything they say.
you're gonna say just about anything to get out of it.
No, I agree with you because I don't think, I mean, back
Unless
then,
you're like in the CIA, or like, you're trained against,
well,
that type of torture. But
yeah, no, I agree. It's weird that, people are like, oh, we're going to have to believe what this guy's saying. But it's like, okay, well, think about it from his point of view. It's like if you're basically getting almost to the point of death and you're just like, listen, I just want this to end. I'm
yeah,
going to tell you whatever you want at this point because, like, what am I going to say that's anything different? And of
and it
course, he
sounds
gets
like
killed.
yeah, and it sounds like that's exactly what they did. And you know, the one thing, that when you look up the history of werewolves, before America had witch trials, Europe had werewolf trials. So a lot of these European, you know, places had the same type of trials that we had here for witches. So people were generally afraid that people who were committing even simple murders were werewolves.
But they would have to have proof of like remains left behind or something
Oh,
like
they
that.
would go through, and like I said, we will get there because there are some crazy things that they did to try to, verify whether somebody was a werewolf. And one of them was like they literally would cut open somebody and open them so wide to see if there was fur underneath their skin.
Yeah. You know what? Yeah, we'll get there. I'm just gonna be very
So
surprised at how they work. Yeah.
it's like you can't just like do simple tests, but you actually have to cut them open. And we're talking 15th, 16th century. It's not like they have the medical, things that they have today. Like you cut somebody open, they're probably going to die.
Well, and not only that, I mean, again, they're naive. They don't know the entirety of what this person was doing or whatever the case is. I mean, who knows? Maybe it was just a giant wolf that wasn't technically this person
Yeah.
and could have easily done the same thing. But like again, they just assume. What is that? It makes an ass out of you and me. Kind of like that whole thing. Like
Uh-huh.
you just don't know. But looking at the witch trials though, versus like the werewolf trials. Um, so some of the things that I was looking at, like the characteristics, right? So like, of course they're pack animals. They always travel in pairs, and they have to grow as a group, and there's always an alpha and a beta, whatever. And so, they typically, pretty much what I just said. So like, and then of course they have like the outcasts, the omegas, like the
Right.
ones that they don't want to have to deal with anymore. But like, some of the things that in this case, kind of like we've already mentioned a little bit, but like having those supernatural abilities, like the superhuman strength, like having the speed, the agility, the durability to like withstand a lot of, in this case, people like with pitchforks and like being stabbed and so on and so forth. So, having these abilities, allowed them to, again, run, far distances, but also get away from let's say hunters or whatever in the case is, but in this case, I mean, look at their jaws, look at their teeth, and look at everything else that they do. I mean, I would be surprised if there was any human remains afterwards, because they would just pretty much eat them whole and then just devour them as they were. So like,
Yeah.
I would be very surprised if there was anything left behind.
Yeah. I mean, you look at some of the movies that they've made, and I mean, yeah, we can look at history and say like there's no chance that any of these guys that we've mentioned, and possibly like many others, they 98, probably 99%, they weren't werewolves. I mean, let's be honest, they probably just weren't werewolves. They were just crazy people.
Right. And just, I mean, you look at the witch trials. I mean, they probably weren't witches. They were just, maybe people practicing
Just the
medicinal
fear,
medicine. Yeah.
just a fear of people going crazy and having that belief like that person is a witch because they're able to do this and nobody else can.
Well,
They must be a witch. And
yeah. I mean, of course, you look at like Mighty
it's like
Python.
if somebody spins around 7 times and then they spin around the opposite way the 8th time, oh, you're a witch. It's like, no.
Well,
That doesn't make any sense.
I mean, but if you want to look at like media or like like movies and whatnot, I mean, I know like Mighty Python, of course they're like, oh, she's a witch, and then like they throw in the basically drown her basically, and you know, to prove that these people were either witches or, let's say in this case, like werewolves. I mean, you could try all these simple tests, all these little things or whatever, but basically you're just killing them in a public execution, and it's not even worth
Yeah.
doing. But they're just like, oh, it's whatever, it's not a big deal. But I mean, the last thing I was going to mention too about the characteristics I forgot to mention was like the senses, right? So like having like a dog scent, right? So you could have the innate ability to smell things from further, like miles away, and like being able to like track and be able to like see what you know we couldn't see as humans, right? So like, I don't know if like a dog can see it, but like let's say like when they sniff something and they're like, oh, I want to track something, they, I don't know. I mean, I know in movies they like to portray it, but like have like basically like an invisible line of like where the scent is actually going. Like I always think of like cartoons like back in the day with like the pie sitting at the the windowsill, and people are like, ooh, that smells good. Like it's that invisible scent, like or whatever. But
Yeah.
with werewolves, it's for them, it's, probably one of their very, keen abilities that, allow them to do what they need to do. And so if they want to track, they can, like they unfortunately, do a ravenous, kind of like, killing spree and whatnot. So like they may figure out like who's the enemy, who's not the enemy. Like, are their loved ones that, they're trying to like figure out if they're, worth their time even killing, or if they're going to be, something that they realize that they're like, you know what, no, this is not someone I should be dealing with right now. Because you never know. Because unfortunately, with werewolves, they'll kill anybody, and they don't realize like, after they're done, and then like if let's say they're in their human form, they might realize like, oh shit, I just killed my mother, or I just killed, my brother or something like that. And you don't know because they're the basically the body is taking over their mind, and it just, it makes it all chaos.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the characteristics. Like, I mean, we're talking about a mythological monster, so I mean, it really depends on the lore that's used. I mean, everybody kind of uses their own, version, their own story. So, some might be able to use some of these abilities in their human form, where others, they may not. And where, werewolf and lycanthrope are sort of the same word.
I mean, yeah, to a degree.
They're sort of the same word. You know, movies like Underworld really made werewolf and lycan two different characters.
Well, I know, if I'm not mistaken, in that movie, like the lycans were the bad guys, versus like the werewolves were, you know, I guess I'm just trying to think of it exactly. Like they're a more human wolves, I guess, if you want to call them, like, because they're not like they have the ability to control it a little bit better than the lycans, because they were like pure blood. And I guess
It was opposite.
Was it the opposite?
Yeah.
Oh, well then I see then my bad. But like, being
They've always portrayed like lycans as like the superior, because they were able to control, and like the werewolves were more of like the feral.
Right, and
they were unable to control it. And I think once you transformed into that wolf, like you were that for forever. Like you were kind of the werewolf form.
See, I would have thought it would have been different, like in some regard, only because I mean, maybe I was wrong. I mean, maybe I was wrong in saying that, but like, I mean, I get what you're saying. Like being like the pure blood, like they know how to control it. They may have like family that helps them learn how to control it. Where
I mean, they're able to shift whenever they want. Is basically like what the lycans were, but yeah. So they kind of made those two distinctions differently. Where I think like the lycans were more able to have some of those, the speed, the strength, and the durability and the senses, while they weren't in that wolf form. And you might have a werewolf who might only be able to transform when the moon is full, or if they have that the lore where there is like a belt, or there are some stories where there's a specific item like a necklace or a charm that makes them able to transform, where they may have like no abilities until they transform. So it depends really on the lore. So John, some crazy methods in history that have been reported to become a werewolf. And some of these are really, really weird. Like in Brazil, I'm starting right in the middle, by the way.
I see that now.
Yeah. In Brazil, it's believed when a woman has 7 daughters and then the 8th child is a male, the latter is likely to be a werewolf.
No. Like I just don't like.
So people, if you have
8 kids,
if you have 7 daughters and then your 8th child is a male, he's going to be a werewolf.
I mean, I'm going to say this. Okay. Who in their right mind thinks that having 8 kids is the right idea? I mean, if you think that you have 7 daughters and then all of a sudden the 8th child is a male, and then you're going to believe that they're going to turn into a werewolf, I think you got some issues, my friend. I mean,
and that's not the craziest one. So Italy, France, and Germany, it was said when a man or a woman could turn into a werewolf if he or she on a certain Wednesday or Friday slept outside on a summer night with the full moon shining directly on their face.
See, Maybe like, but that's way oddly specific. I mean, because who knows? I mean, maybe they're just out camping, or maybe they're doing whatever. But like, I don't know. I just think that one I could see a little bit, but it's very weird that it's very like
Yeah.
weird on a Wednesday or a Friday, especially if a full moon is so happily, right then and there. I mean, because that could just be, no offense. I mean, they could have just been drunk laying on the, the floor or whatever of like the ground, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's just some of these beliefs. Like, I mean, some of these were like the removal of clothing, putting on a belt made of wolf skin, probably as a substitute for like the entire animal skin. Um, that was like one of the, the methods that people believed were a way to, become or transform into a werewolf. So if they saw somebody that was wearing just a belt made of, wolf skin, they obviously have to be a werewolf.
So it's also weird too. So I love how they keep mentioning in other cases the body is rubbed with a magic salve or ointment. So they keep bringing up ointment in this, and so it must be like some kind of like paste of like herbal like essences or I don't know, something like that, because there's no really defining of what they're talking about
I
unless
think that's
it's
just in history because I think maybe it's been reported a lot, but I mean, obviously, if somebody really, really believes that like this ointment has some kind of an ability to transform you into a wolf.
I don't know. I mean that one just like keeps getting brought up, but I mean
Yeah.
like another one, drinking rainwater out of the footprint of the animal in question or from certain enchanted streams were also considered effectual modes of accomplishing metamorphosis. So
I've heard of this one.
I never heard of that one. I never heard of drinking rainwater out of
So
a
this is like
certain.
drinking if you saw like a footprint of say a werewolf, or you believe it's a footprint of a werewolf, and then obviously there's rainwater in it, and you drink from that rainwater. The belief was that will now transform, or whatever, into, you will become a werewolf yourself.
I mean, I don't know exactly if I would have believed that in particular, but I mean, like this next one, becoming a werewolf simply by being bitten or scratched by another werewolf as a form of contagion is common in modern horror. Yes, that's what I mentioned before. But this kind of transmission is rare in legend, unlike the case in vampirism. So that's why I'm saying like the modern take is like, okay, you got to be bit or you got to be scratched or you got to, have some kind of
Yeah.
contact. And so like that one, like all these other ones, I mean, I've never heard of until just now, but like that one, yes, that one is
That
the
one
more common.
we've heard of because obviously like we are kind of desensitized by the movies and the TV shows and stuff that we've seen. But, with history and legend, being bitten or scratched was never a thing.
Which I was surprised. I would have thought that would have been something that they would have, mentioned at that time. You know what I mean? Because like
Yeah.
I just feel like that would be. I would say probably all of these like kind of like washed, but like I think that one would kind of make the most sense, even if it is like modern take on it. But like I think that would be something that they could use, like just like it said in vampirism. Like I mean, that's kind of the same thing, but like that makes more sense to me, versus like, oh, I'm gonna go drink some rainwater, from a footprint, and then, or I'm gonna go lay out on a Wednesday or a Friday night with a full moon, and they're just laying on the grass. When that happens, it's like that's very, you know what I mean? That's weird and oddly specific at the same time.
Yeah, I mean obviously like it just goes back to like the fear people had of just werewolves in general. They had a fear of people being werewolves. And yeah, I mean, maybe when they saw, a couple that have 7 children and they're all female, and then all of a sudden they have their 8th child and it's a male. What the heck is going on? That kid's going to be a werewolf. We need to destroy it.
Well, I
Um,
mean, it's all. I mean, I'm just gonna say it. I mean, it's kind of like the way that China's doing their population control, like basically killing off, unfortunately, little girls, and then just keeping the males around. Like, well, okay, let's try this again. You need male and female to reproduce, but like in this case, it's like, oh, we have 7 daughters. Oh, the 8th one's the male. I guess we got to kill him because it could be a werewolf. I'm like,
he's a
that's
wolf.
you know what I mean. Like, it's just so
Yeah.
weird. I mean, that's unheard of, and I don't understand why Brazil thinks that. But looking at the lore between werewolf versus the lichen, right? So the werewolf lore can typically depict a person turning once into a werewolf, but not within their own power. So like werewolves only transform during a full moon, which right
We've
in
seen that
media.
a lot with like, certain movies or certain TV shows where I mean even like you look at Teen Wolf,
Yep.
the both the movie and the
Oh, you mean with Michael J. Fox and yep,
yeah, and the TV show
with not Michael J. Fox.
with not Michael J. Fox, but I mean the show in itself as a whole, I mean, yes, they eventually did transition it to being able to control it, but there was, I think moments where the transformation was not controlled.
Well, right, because once they saw the full moon, it was like, oh, we got it, and then they just run outside and they go do their thing, and then they come back, and you're like, "Where'd you go?" To the bathroom. Well, that was a long bathroom break. You're like, "Yeah, I know. It is what it is, man. My pee has to go." But like, so I find this interesting that werewolves are said to be smaller than lichens, and they have less muscles or like muscular kind of a thing. So I would have thought that if werewolves were more not controlling of their own abilities or like their powers in a sense. I didn't think that lichens would be more, let's say, stronger than werewolves would be. I guess in some ways because like if they're more ravenous and they're more like on a killing rampage, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I feel like they would be more muscular and more like it's like almost like the Hulk. Like the more angrier you get, the stronger you get, kind of a deal. I don't know if like that would come into play on this, but like that's just how I think that werewolves would be instead of the lichens.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I guess it depends on the specific lore. Like I said, it depends on the specific lore people use. So, I mean, obviously, some lore might reverse it. Some, might flip it, reverse it.
Flip it and reverse it. Oh, I heard you.
But I think when you're looking up like basic lore of werewolves, like I think because lichens are typically seen as like pure blood, they're typically seen as like the stronger version because they're they're typically born that way.
Right. It's almost like the royal blood, like
Right.
in a blood, like a
They
bloodline. But
weren't necessarily created by like a bite or a scratch. And I think that that's kind of the distinction where, werewolves in general are maybe a little bit more scrappy. Might not be as muscular, but they can still be just as tall. They just might not be as muscular.
yeah, and I mean, like the next thing, like it talking about how werewolves would be more aggressive than lichens. I full heartedly believe that because again, they don't have control of their basically
Right. They don't have
werewolf
any
instincts.
control of what they're doing in that moment where lichens I most lore, I think like even when you look at, movies like Underworld, which is probably the one that I would go to most if I was looking at, werewolf lore.
Oh, you don't want to go to Twilight?
Um they, in that movie they depict them more of having that control where they can transform, do what they're doing and then kind of transform back where, you kind of look at the werewolves and they transform, if the moon is full or if there's a specific curse or whatever, and
Yeah,
they don't know what they're doing. So like they'll wake up in the middle of the woods,
right. And they have no idea
no
what
idea
just
what they
happened.
did.
Well, right. I mean, it's like you know, kind of like going on to the like kind of the next bit here too. But like you're right. I mean, werewolves, right, being created versus being born with it, and so having that control over your transformation, all that stuff like we've already been talking about. I mean, I think hands down that makes total sense in that regard because if you're born with it, yeah, you start at an earlier age, you learn how to control it a lot better than someone who just got bit or scratched and that just happened 2 days ago, and you're like, well, what do I do? Well, go
Yeah.
talk to a lichen buddy, and they'll tell you all about what they've been through. But I mean, when you look at this creature, yeah, I mean, I guess if you want to say vampires and lichens, I mean, they're to a degree. I mean, they're of course different creatures, but like, they're very similar in that sense where they, you know, if you're a pureblood, like let's say Dracula, or maybe actually that's a bad example because it's not really a pure blood, but like, somebody who was born as a vampire, per se, and that has been, living on this earth for hundreds of years, and then someone who was born and then they live for hundreds of years. I mean, that's kind of like almost identical to what,
Which
you know,
I'm sure at some point we'll probably do an episode on vampires because that has a whole lore too. But depending on the lore, yeah, I mean, vampires, I think the most famous type of lore for them is like the older they are, the stronger they are.
well, because they're wise, they understand more. They've lived on this earth for so long, so
I
they
think it's a power thing too. Like the older they are, the more I think their like abilities and powers mature. Where like newer vampires may not have like the same power level. You know what I mean? Like they might
yeah.
be a level one where like somebody who's been a vampire for 1,000 years might already be like, I'm talking video games,
Yes, of course, video games.
but they might already be like a level 15. So in
Yeah.
order to get to that level, they have to live for another 1,000 years to get to where that vampire is. But by the time that vampire gets to 1,000, the other guy will be at 2,000 and he'll be at like level 30.
Well, right, and,
So,
and like that's the thing; it just keeps growing and growing and growing. And so,
yeah.
like with the lichens too, I mean, that's got to be the same concept where if you're born into it and you live for let's say 1,000 years, you're already at a higher level than a lot of these werewolves are because if they're only just got bit or just got scratched, you don't have any like they don't have any idea of what their innate abilities are versus like these guys that were been around for
Yeah,
thousands of
I don't
years.
know if they really be able to control like what they were doing. I mean, maybe as a wolf, they might have some level of control if they were with a pack or with a group because they would go with the group. Um, but I think as a whole, I don't think they would have a whole lot of control over what they were doing. I mean, you would basically kind of just be what a wolf is now. Like you would be with a pack, but as far as like being, this kind of militant werewolf, like where I'm gonna go over there and I'm gonna attack that castle. Not as a werewolf, you're not. You're gonna go over there and you're probably gonna hunt food. And then you're gonna wake up in the middle of the forest with blood and guts and whatever else all over you, and you're gonna go, "Oh, I did it again."
Yeah, because you basically it's like having a hangover moment because you're like, what did I just do?
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
but the weakness is so like one of the things I mentioned was silver. That was a common theme that they would like to use. And I understand like I'm gonna bring up Van Helsing because like that was a very notorious movie because of course
yeah,
Van Helsing, basically tries to kill. I think yeah, it was one of the werewolves, and he was like using. I mean, it was a pistol, but it was like with silver bullets and stuff like that. So of course that's what they would use.
right.
But I would assume even back then, it's very hard to find silver
Yeah, I don't
in
think
that regard.
silver. I mean, historically they didn't use silver. Obviously, like they probably more resulted with fire. Because that's what it sounded like. Just historically, it looked like they usually burned people, like they kind of did with the witch trials. I think that was probably like the most common.
I was gonna say that was the most common thing to basically do, whether you were a vampire, a witch, a wolf, or whatever. I mean, it was
Yeah,
basically the
yeah.
most common thing you could do.
But they also like they had this idea too, where I mean, there is an actual thing called wolfsbane.
I know. Is it a flower?
I believe it's a flower.
Because I know. Yeah, of course I've heard of it, but it's interesting that in a large dose, it might just be poison, but it can also incapacitate a werewolf temporarily. So, I mean, that's cool. But the only way to, if you can, you know what I mean? So, like, how are you, let's say you do that. What are you going to burn them right there on the spot? Like, you know what I mean? Because that's the only thing you could do
It,
at that
it
moment.
it was thought to if you gave it to a werewolf in human form that it would eventually cure them as a werewolf. But obviously, we're talking a mythological creature and not a real creature. So, you know, would it really? Probably not, because the person's not a werewolf. you know.
No, and this next one I find interesting too is like, if let's say in human form, that would be considered, fatal. Again, they would die from it, especially if they weren't in their wolf form. But like again, if you're in the wolf form, things that would be considered fatal, it wouldn't even make them die. It wouldn't basically do anything. So if like let's say for example you got shot in human form, yeah, you're probably gonna die. right?
Yeah.
So if you get shot in this, you're like, whatever, it's just a bullet, just grazed or, goes right through me, whatever. And like they have that innate ability to like kind of, I wouldn't say heal themselves, but like,
Some lore do. I mean, you look at, I go to Underworld, and a lot of the, that wolf mythology, like a lot of them did have that quick healing ability with being that werewolf. And yeah, I mean, you get shot. I mean, there are some that like, I think, and I don't remember the movie, but it did come out in the 80s.
of course, everything has to revolve the 80s.
It did come out in the 80s, and there was, I believe, a werewolf in that movie, and it was a group of kids that were like, they weren't necessarily monster hunters, but they became kind of this like monster hunter group.
Almost
But it
sounds
had
like
like
Scooby Doo, but go ahead.
it had like Frankenstein and Dracula and werewolf, and had all these kind of crazy characters, but like their werewolf character in the movie like got completely like dismembered, like lost his legs, his arms, everything. And eventually like the pieces all came back together and he was fine. So like it really depends on the lore, because the werewolf clearly didn't die. The pieces just kind of came back together. Now, do I think that that's outlandish? Yes, I do.
I mean, that almost sounds like Frankenstein. Like, how like, if he takes off his arm, he can put it right back on, no problem. It's like whatever, but like to have everything dismembered and then it somehow magically comes back together, it almost sounds like Deadpool, but
It,
like
it happened.
regrowing.
It happened in the movie. I'm just saying.
Well,
But
that's why movies don't lie, apparently. So,
I do think like obviously if you know in movies like Underworld and some of those, like when a werewolf or lichen like lost the arm, the person also didn't have an arm. Like it didn't just miraculously grow back.
well, no, again, it's not like Deadpool where he grows a
Yeah.
baby arm, but it's like, yeah, no, I agree.
But like, wounds that were fatal, like if you got stabbed like right in the gut, pulling that out, like obviously you would die.
I mean, back then, yes, because you didn't have the medical technology that we would
But
have
as a
now.
wolf,
Yeah.
like you could pull it out and not die
No, yeah.
and keep going. It might incapacitate you, maybe temporarily, but
Yeah, temporarily, but then they'll
Yeah.
find a way to come at you. But I think, looking at the cures, one of the most interesting ones, I'm going to start pretty much in the middle, kind of like what you did last time, is a Sicilian belief of Arabic origin, which I find this very interesting, says that for a cure, if you it says holds that a werewolf can be cured of its ailment by striking it 3 times on the forehead or scalp with a knife.
huh.
That's very oddly specific, but I just think it's weird that if you strike it in the forehead 3 times,
What if you accidentally did 4 times?
I don't know. I guess I wouldn't cure it. I might kill him. I don't know. But then it's like, or scalpel with a knife. Like, so you're saying basically to cut like the forehead with a knife and just that's going to cure it.
So the one that I find really, really funny on this whole list is a Danish belief holds that simply scolding a werewolf
will cure it. What are you going to be like?
You're going to just walk up, no, you're not doing this to me today. No, sir.
Why are you doing? Stop it! Hey, get down, boy. Like that's how it's gonna work. I mean, and then like the other belief here, from the same culture, it says it involves the piercing of the werewolf's hands with nails.
Mm.
So basically, just unfortunately, you're gonna do I'm gonna say his name in vain, but Jesus Christ, man, is that what you're gonna do? Put him on a cross and just hang him there?
Hey,
And that's how it's gonna be cured. Like I don't understand that.
So there, yeah, I mean, there's a couple, like the ancient Greeks and Romans believe in the power of exhaustion in curing people of lycanthropy.
Okay, hey,
So they would suggest subjected people to long periods of physical activity in the hope of being purged of werewolfism. So the practice stemmed from the fact that like they believe that many werewolves would be left feeling too weak and debilitated to transform.
first of all, how do you think that that's gonna work exactly?
I don't think that works at all.
No,
honest.
I mean honestly. So let's say there is a full moon. What do you think would happen? Like, you know what I mean? In my
if they
opinion.
were really a werewolf, they're going to transform either way.
Well,
But
yeah,
the thought was that if you make the human person so tired and weak that the werewolf would not possibly come out because the person was tired and weak. But
That's not true.
If it's really like, you're looking at the human being and you're looking at the wolf as two distinct things, whatever state the human is in doesn't really matter because the wolf is a completely different
Well, right, entity, and it's just
entity.
it's
Yeah.
not gonna make any sense at that point. I mean, and then like in medieval Europe, well, this is a good one. Traditionally, there are three methods one can use to cure a victim of werewolfism: medicinally, yep, wolfsbane makes
Wolfsbane,
sense;
yep.
surgically, or by exorcism.
By exorcism. I love that one.
And then, however, many cures, have advocated by medieval medical practitioners prove fatal to the patient. No kidding, to
That
the
does not
patients.
surprise me
So
whatsoever.
why do you think that, I don't know, surgically,
I can almost assume like by surgically they mean like let's try to remove the animal from within this person's body.
so basically, like you said, open up the actual like
Yeah.
arm or like their face or
So essentially they're just taking somebody's skin off of their body and then they realize, hey, there's no wolf under here.
oh, I guess he's dead, so it's
Oh,
whatever.
well, let's just move the body.
I mean, exorcism, like the power of Christ compels. Like I don't like, you know what I mean? Like I don't understand. Like why would you?
Because they're trying to exorcise the wolf from the person's body.
I understand, but you think that, saying, you know, I compel you
Power
to
of Christ
compels you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't understand why you think that's gonna work.
I know. And then the very last one, rolling in dew is also said to cure the ailment, and not Mountain Dew, John.
That was a really cheesy joke.
Yeah, I know.
That was a really cheesy one.
I
man.
just wanted to make sure people knew it wasn't Mountain Dew, but like, dew from the morning.
I'm glad you had to describe that in that moment, Matt.
But that is one that's also like, really? Like, is there some magical property that I should know about
The
like,
morning dew.
condensation on grass?
So wait a minute. So should we just like give that a shot and be like, hey guys, well wait, look, it just rained last night. Let's look at the dew from this morning, or especially like during wintertime, or like fall. Like it gets really cold outside and you're just like, oh hey, let me just grab some dew real quick and
Yeah.
throw it on you and we'll call it a day.
I think you're a werewolf. Go roll around in that
The dew
over there.
just not Mountain Dew. I mean, Matt has Mountain Dew with him, but I mean,
You're not rolling around in my Mountain Dew. I can tell you that right now.
I mean, like I wouldn't be doing that. But I mean, probably the last kind of topic we'll be talking about is the movie aspect of werewolves and the geek culture. So
Yes.
we've talked about Underworld. We've talked about how vampires and the werewolves kind of aspect to it, and
Yeah.
like the lycans and werewolves. But I know I'm going to kind of jump in the middle again because I love doing that, or actually really towards the end.
Oh, I know you were going to jump right to that one.
So Werewolf by Night. Okay. So MCU, they did a really good job. Yes, I guess it's a short film. That's really what they did, but it basically,
It's more of like a limited, it's a special.
I would say, it's a special, but basically it introduces monsters into the MCU. Although, can I ask what WBN is? Like, I don't understand that, man.
Werewolf by Night. John?
I'm sorry, but I was just looking at it real quick, and I'm like, what is this? Some kind of acronym I don't know about. Anyways, but so yes, Werewolf by Night is a self-contained storyline. It's not said that how the story or the characters relate to the MCU, but it would be interesting to see if this evolves into more than just a special. I agree that we've talked about how the Midnight Suns, if they ever did something like that, they could bring, Werewolf by Night, they could bring in Blade, they can bring in like other characters like, Ghost Rider and like a few others that were like part of that, kind of genre.
Yeah, it definitely makes them relevant as far as, MCU, but it's also one of those things like where, it is a self-contained story. So it's not like, it's not currently connected to the MCU. So, maybe like Man-Thing. Like,
yeah.
But like maybe beyond like that character or maybe some of the other ones, like you may not actually see them in the MCU.
You might be able to see them in the MCU, but like it'll probably be, they might start off with movies like separately from like the main storyline, and then they might somehow maybe bring that in later on. Because I feel like what they're trying to probably do is just like develop the characters first, and then eventually they'll probably have some weird idea that let's say Galactus comes into play. Oh, we're going to call in the Midnight Suns, or something like that, and just randomly bring them in. But of course, we've mentioned Teen Wolf.
Teen Wolf, yeah, that one was, I mean, obviously it's your typical, 80s, you know, movie. So, I mean, using the term werewolf loosely on that movie, but it's definitely like, historic and
I mean, and then some of these other movies, like the Howling series, American Werewolf in London and Paris.
see, you've never seen them. I
You're
mean,
right. I'm
granted,
just
like
saying.
the Howling movies, I would say not all of them are great. Um, but they're classic in the ways that, when especially like, you look at American Werewolf in Paris and American Werewolf in London, um, the Howling movies in general, those movies, as early as they were made, you look at movies like The Wolfman that was made in like 1941. A lot of those early movies never depicted an actual transformation on screen. So, yeah, we see Underworld, we see, Werewolf by Night, we see some of these newer TV shows and newer things, and they show them, and we see them on screen, but it wasn't until like the Howling movies and American Werewolf in London and Paris that we actually saw close up shots of somebody transforming into a wolf on screen. And I want to say, I don't know if it was either the American Werewolf series or if it was the Howling. Um, but it was one of those movies where it was all practical effects. And like you actually see the hand growing into, that werewolf hand. You actually see the snout growing into the werewolf snout. Like you see the full transformation.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about like when you were talking about practical effects versus like CGI, right? So like, I like mentioning Van Helsing because it's just a good movie to kind of like mention here. But like, yeah, it shows like the actual like quick transformation of this guy turning into a werewolf, like literally what you just described. But I would say, of course, more CGI in this case. But
Right.
like, growing the snout, growing the hands, growing 8-9 feet tall, you know, and being this basically wolf, standing on its hind legs basically.
Yeah, I
And
mean that was Underworld too. I mean that was all CGI with the transformations in that movie.
no, but that's what I'm saying. It's like, you look at the earlier days of practical effects and making it seem like it's happening in that moment, but
And
like,
it's really, really amazing. And you really have to take it for what it is. Like, is it cheesy looking? Sure.
that's what they had.
But at the time, it's really, really revolutionary because nobody ever did it.
Well, and it was also probably very hard to do that. It's not something that was easily done in that time frame because
Well, yeah,
again,
I mean, you make something that does a particular thing, and you might have one shot to get it right. Because if it doesn't work, you might have to take a whole nother month, 2 months, 3 months to rebuild whatever that that scene with the hand. If that didn't work, you probably have to go back, rebuild a whole nother hand, and then come back and reshoot that one scene again.
right, versus like CGI where you could just
Right.
automatically do it loop loop. It would take probably like a day or two to like maybe fix it or do whatever. You know what I mean? It wouldn't be that like
Yeah.
that bad versus back then. But like, looking at some of the actually looking at some of the TV shows, I didn't
There's
realize.
not a whole lot of TV shows, and Hemlock Grove was one that was really different. That was a Netflix show,
I
and
Yeah.
the character that was a werewolf in that show, he didn't transform in the way that a lot of werewolves transform.
So like then how would he transform then?
So he transformed in the way like the werewolf was kind of already inside of him. And basically, like his skin would just rip off.
See, and that's kind of like what, and this is why I said I bring back Van Helsing. That's exactly what happened. It was like it just rips off his skin and like skin just flies off his thing and just shakes it all off and no big deal.
Yeah, so it's kind of like the wolf was already inside the body, and when he's transforming, it's like the literally like the skin is just exploding off of the body, and you see like the hand coming out of his hand, the paws coming out of the hands, and like it's just literally like the head coming out of his, and
His noggin, yeah.
it's completely disgusting.
Well, of course it is. And that is probably the most amazing thing to look at,
But it is a cool scene to kind of see because it's like it's a different variation of watching that transformation as opposed to like you're seeing like the hand grow and the knuckles forming in that certain way and the snout growing and the hair coming out of the follicles and
well, yeah. Actually, another thing you didn't actually mention was music, which I found interesting because there's only one person that I do know that had a music video. Come on, man. I know you know who it is. Come on. And it was back in the 80s, man, because we got to love the 80s. What is it, Matt?
go for it.
No, you go ahead because I know what it is. I want to make sure I would hope that you would know. Okay, fine. Since you're just staring at me. Michael Jackson was in his music video Thriller because it literally shows him being a werewolf. And granted, he's dancing and hanging out with a bunch of zombies, but like towards the end, he becomes the werewolf. And it's funny how they actually made a basically a short film based off of that music video, which I found interestingly enough later on. But yeah, I mean, I'm surprised you didn't mention that because that was another depiction technically.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a huge depiction of a werewolf, though. I mean,
it is.
You kind of see it, but it's more a zombie to me than it is werewolf. But I mean, it's there. It's there.
You got to give it some credit.
It's there. But Being Human is another one of those TV shows, and that one, it was first done in the UK, and then the US kind of redid it. It was pretty popular, and that one had, it was really the kind of relationship between a vampire, a ghost, and a werewolf that were all kind of living together.
Oh, wait a minute. Was this on Hulu?
It's probably on Hulu now.
Yeah, or maybe that's what it is. Yeah,
I think when I saw it, it wasn't on Hulu, but
it was like FX or something like that. It was like Fox or something. I can't remember exactly, but I think I know what you're talking about. I mean, because what you just described just reminded me.
I mean, it had a similar treatment like that The Office kind of had, but
yeah,
it was Being Human, and the werewolf kind of had the same thing, where he would transform not knowing what happened, kind of more of that tragic kind of character. It was a good show. It was a good show. Teen Wolf obviously is I actually really enjoy Teen Wolf as a TV show.
Interesting. Because I know the TV show, of course, like kind of, I don't know if it really followed suit with the book or not the book, the actual movie, but I think I understand it's more of a drama than anything.
It didn't follow. I mean, I don't think it followed the movie per se. It definitely made changes, but once the seasons got on, like the show definitely got better.
So basically, if you're watching,
it evolved.
Okay, well that's good. I'm glad it finally evolved because like that show lasted for I don't even remember how long. I know it's been around for like it was like
they just came out with a movie too.
Well, no, didn't they? I mean, I don't remember exactly how many seasons, but I know there was quite a few seasons for that show.
There were, yeah. I want to say like 8.
Oh, I thought it was like 10. I thought it was like they got to the 10 mark.
It could be 10.
I don't know, but I mean, it's not surprising that, for example, R.L. Stein and Stephen King and a few other people on this list.
And there's so many books. I mean, you're looking at books like there are werewolf books that date all the way to like the 13th and 14th century. So like there's way too many like werewolf type themed books that we could mention on this show.
I mean, R.L. Stein with Goosebumps, like, I mean, of course I remember reading a lot of the Goosebumps as a kid, but like, yeah, I mean, I know there was one in
Stephanie Meyer. I mean, she wrote the Twilight series, but she wrote books specifically on werewolves too.
But of course you mentioned Twilight.
Anne Rice. Like I said, there's many, many more authors.
I just realized you never put Twilight on the movies.
No,
I mention it. Is that why? Why not? Why did you want to mention it?
It's a terrible movie, and I'm not.
No, it's a terrible saga series. I know because listen, I understand that you'd go for Taylor all day long because that werewolf man. You're on
Hey,
Lautner's team.
I
Um,
don't like things that sparkle. I don't like glitter.
you don't like Robert Pattinson? Is that what you're saying? You don't like him as Batman?
I like him as Batman, but I don't like him sparkly.
Oh, okay. Um, let's see. And then video games. I know The Sims did that. I know they did like a werewolf packet. Like I don't remember which
Altered
Sims.
Beast. That's like really like the one that nobody I don't think really thinks of like the Sega Genesis Altered Beast was a werewolf. Like the character that you're playing is as a werewolf. Like when you start the game, it's a little person and then he transforms into a werewolf.
Huh.
And that's what you're using. I think the actual like um when you're playing the game though, I don't think it's just werewolves that are in that game. I think there's other variations because the were in the werewolf, like there's other shape shifting type were characters. Like there's a were bear and a were tiger. Like
Oh, Were
it's
Bear. Sorry.
there are though. I mean, in mythology, like there are all these different type of were characters where it's not just wolves that you can transform into. Like you can transform into a bear or a tiger
I just
or a
yeah.
cheetah or
That
there.
just seems weird to me, in my personal opinion. I mean, it'd be kind of weird to be like, "Hey, what are you? I'm a werebear." Do you have to rhyme?
I'm a were bear.
Why are you stare all day there? Anyways,
Um,
um,
but yeah, I mean, Altered Beast was the character that you kind of start with is a werewolf.
hmm. I mean, granted, I never played that game, so I wouldn't know.
I played the game and I was terrible at it.
Oh, I'm sorry. How old were you in that, Matt?
I don't know.
Oh, wait, too young. I remember.
I was too young.
And then, of course, Elder Scrolls.
Elder Scrolls, yes, they had a lycanthrope curse, so you can actually have a curse where you do transform into a werewolf. They also had a vampirism curse too.
And that's
That
Matt
one
for
was
you.
terrible.
And that's where his nerdiness comes into
Yep.
play.
The Quarry. I've never actually played the Quarry.
Is it the Quarry or the Quarry?
The Quarry. The Quarry. The Quarry.
Well, I don't know. That's what you said at the beginning.
The Quarry, John.
The
The
Quarry.
Quarry.
Okay.
I've actually never played this game, but apparently there is I don't know if it's a curse or if you get bitten or whatever, but in the game, there's an aspect of it where your character can become a werewolf.
Hmm. And I know, yeah, Resident Evil Village. I know that one recently. I would say like the last couple of years, right? Village.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember because I do remember seeing that there was a werewolf in the game itself, but I never played it because I'm all set with that.
Yeah,
But
I'm all set with that too. But
yeah, I don't think there is any many video games now. I'm thinking about it because like I can think of like the Van Helsing. I know Van
there's
Helsing.
one that's on the PlayStation Store, and I was trying to find like the name of it, and I really didn't have a chance to look it up on my PlayStation Store. But I remember playing it, and I mean it wasn't like a very popular game.
I mean, not surprising, but yeah.
But it was, it was one of those like, um, you play kind of as a character that is a werewolf, and um, it was kind of just a cool game, but like it gets kind of just stupid and monotonous after a while, and then it goes from like really easy to kind of impossible hard where you can't get anywhere.
Hmm.
So I stopped playing it, but um
I think the only thing I can mention, yeah, I mean, granted, I had never played D&D.
so the
But-
game actually was
my
the
bad.
game was Werewolf the Apocalypse.
Yep, never heard of it. I don't know if
That's
I
what-
want to play it.
That's what the game is. Like I said, it was kind of a fun game because you can walk around like kind of as like this like mercenary type guy, and then when you need to kind of transform into the werewolf, like that was kind of the cool aspect of the game.
Hmm.
Where if you had certain abilities as the werewolf, you can kind of transform and just lay waste to everybody, and then you can kind of go back and like the rest of it was like when you were in human form, like you can kind of like you had to sneak around, and that was like the difficulty where there were certain parts like if people saw you, you restarted the whole map over again, and it got to a point where like you can't transform into a wolf and just take them all out because you can only do that at certain points. And I was like, well, this is kind of stupid. Why design a game like that? I want to be a fucking wolf all the time.
What was that, man? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch that last part. What did you say?
You heard me.
No, I'm sorry. I just don't hear you. Use those particular words all the time. But anyways,
I want to be a wolf all the time, John.
No, you wanted to be a what was it? A fucking wolf? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
I want to be a wolf all the time.
I'm sorry,
I don't want to just walk around as a human being when the game is werewolf.
Okay.
Right.
Well, I'm just look. Then you know what? Why don't you
Right.
become a video game designer? Okay, if you're going to complain about that.
I'm just saying.
I'm just
The
saying.
game is werewolf, not human walking around.
I'm just saying. But anyways, as you rudely interrupted me earlier, the D&D thing, because again, I haven't done it, which I said that we were going to do at some point, but I didn't realize there was a lycanthrope race.
There is, and I don't know. I mean, it might be more of like a custom race, and I don't know. Like, I think depending on like the DM that you have, it may be one of those questions that you'd be like, "Hey, can I use the lycanthrope as a race?" Question, because he may that your DM may be like, "What?"
What are you talking about?
Because it is like an official race in D&D, but I don't know if a lot of people would just go ahead and use it. Because obviously, like if you were, a lycan in D&D, you would also be a human. So that would require you like, I'm going to transform into a wolf, and then I'm going to take out these two people right here, and that would require you to roll to not only do your attack, but to transform into said wolf. So obviously, if you fail,
You're not being a wolf.
you're gonna basically be a weak ass human, and
Basically.
I'm gonna be walking up to two like probably like really super powered people that could probably decimate my health pretty good, and all I'm gonna do is walk up to them and like, hey, smack them upside their head and be like, yeah, I just taught you something.
Then you're like, okay, here's a dope slap. That's all you get from me. But
And you have these two barbarian soldiers with like huge battle axes, and they're like, we're gonna kill you now.
and you're like, oh, thanks, guy.
Oh, thanks. Sorry, I smacked you.
But I guess as an overall review, with werewolves, I think I agree, man. I think they're honestly one of the, I would say, cooler, mythological kind of creatures. I mean, they're interesting enough. I mean, the lore behind them is interesting. I mean, the cures I thought were ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah,
even
history is crazy. I wouldn't necessarily like look at history as being like the tell all of what werewolf folklore would be. I mean, I definitely like where we are with like movies and media and like some of like that stuff. But I certainly like when you look at history, I don't think looking at people and going, oh, you're the eighth kid and you're a male and you have 7 sisters, you must be a werewolf. We're just gonna burn you, and that's it.
or again, having an exorcism too. The power of Christ compels you to get that werewolf out of you, or
Why are you only wearing a wolf pelt? You're a werewolf.
or again, or hitting someone over the forehead 3 times and then, or just scalp them with a knife. It's like,
Hey,
how do you do that? But guys, again, we're coming close to this. We've been doing this for a bit now. It's getting late, but stay tuned for next week. It's going to be an amazing episode. Again, we appreciate all the love and everything that you do. Check out the merch store. Again, hopefully be on the lookout for some Christmas stuff down the road. But until next time,
Stay geeky.